Hello, hello. Recap of section 5. This is actually the second half of the sieve in the sand. That section that is about how Montag's brain is like a sieve and all the sand is just going through it. He's trying to get things to stick. So where we left off, he is leaving Faber's house and he's like, I don't want to just do what people tell me to do. And Faber says, hey, you'll be ready. I'll read to you. You'll figure it out. You'll make decisions soon enough. He gets home, sits down for dinner, and Mildred's friends come over. They're coming over to watch The White Clown. Mrs. Phelps and Mrs. Bowles. Their conversations, pretty silly. Just nice, very repetitive. This is Montag thinking to Faber what's going to go on. Isn't the show wonderful? Wonderful. What the show actually is, when you think about a white clown, you're like, oh, it's a comedy. It's probably funny. It's two white clowns cutting each other up, like a hand just flying through the air, and she's like in bliss. Shows that addiction to violence. Montag pulls a switch and asks a question. When's the war going to happen? Where's your husbands? All these statements are silly. Army called, it'll be quick. Quick war, no problems. I'm not going to worry about it. Pete will worry about it. Yeah, just let Pete worry about it. He said if I get killed, don't worry about it. Just move on. Get married. Go have fun. Like, even in their serious relationships, it's all about next step, next thing, next fun, next engagement. Not a lot of true connection. Montag just stares, and they're like, isn't he going to say something? Because normally they just get those snappy, thoughtless responses. There is no thought. It's just sounds, noises. Keep talking. Yes, about politics. It's an interesting take here. She's like, I voted for the really good-looking guy. You could just take this as like, yes, they vote based on looks, and it's like middle school popularity contest. But also, even the names of their president, President Nobel or Noble. He's a noble guy. He's powerful. He's well thought of, like the Nobel Prize. The man they ran against him, making it seem like who's the they, but also small, didn't shave, didn't comb his hair, like wasn't put together, didn't look good. We do care about those things for politicians in our society and for leaders, so we can't fault them too much for judging based on looks. But if the good-looking guy is Noble or Nobel, and then the people or the political party who put out the guy who was shorter and didn't look as good, it's called the outs, it's kind of odd. Like, you have to think, does the government control even the election? That a political party, be the outs. Like 3 strikes, you're out. You're left out. You don't want to be out of something. You want to be in on something. Odd choice for a political name. And then it's like this very unlikely candidate. So you could question either they vote purely on looks, or is there a little bit more government control? Montag then has a book. It says, Guy. Shows the book. They're like, how could you have that book? I thought you were trained this other way. Well, Faber's like, don't do it. He's kind of talking under his breath, like, I can't believe it. I got to say something. He decides he'll actually share from it. Mildred's like, share something. Just share one thing. Just be nice about it. The whole time, Faber is not for it. Says pretend, just throw it out. But he decides, based on, actually Mildred steps up here. Mildred has a thought. It's not necessarily to save him so much as maybe to save them both, but comes up with this idea like once a year you can read from something and it's all right. Like, she steps in when he is stuck, when he doesn't know what to say to Faber or just to move on. He says yes, so he's going to read something and then burn it. She actually chooses the poem for him just randomly. It's obviously not random because you saw what Dover Beach is about when you did your questions. So our author here, Ray Bradbury, did make the decision to put in Dover Beach, but here it's just a random selection. He reads the poem, which you had a paraphrase of and a question related to it. Really, you'd be looking for those relations, for this idea of a world that hath joy nor love, and it went on. We see this in this world of these negative things repeated there. Like, yes, the Sea of Faith, like good at first, some connections, but really that second stanza, we see that negative. Why Mrs. Phelps cries, though, we don't know. Could it be she actually understands some of this, comprehends? Maybe. Because previously when we looked with Mildred hearing from a book earlier, she was just like, I don't like that, it's confusing, move on. Maybe her reaction to being confused is crying, or somehow she actually understands the meaning of what their world has lost and it makes her cry. Either way, shouldn't have happened, is upsetting. Somebody's going to say something. There's all the reactions of how bad he is, how terrible he is for doing this. They say, like, you're hurting us. Why would you do something like that? Like, we should just go laugh and be happy. Mildred tries to smooth it over, but they say they're leaving. He burns the book to try to make it okay, but they say they're leaving. They say he's crazy. And Montag does tell them off as they leave about, like, think of all your husbands who are gone, who are behind you. Like, have you ever thought about that? Top of the next page, he's told that he's a fool. Mildred reacts by taking, again, that's a bunch of pills, sleeping pills to be taking. Continues to be told he's a fool. He pulls out the earpiece, but he doesn't throw it away, because by the next few pages he has it back in. And then he walks off. Leaves Mildred to actually take the books that he had, because he's afraid Mildred freaked out. Takes the books, hides them in the bushes. Mildred, no response from her. She's out from taking all her pills. And then he walks off. And it does say, he's alone with his error, but also he does still have the earpiece. He does still have it there. So there is still that connection. Realizes he made them unhappy. Realizes, like, he definitely hurt their feelings. And starts to question, like, should I have done that? Maybe we should just have fun. Like, maybe he shouldn't have to face that all her husbands are gone or these terrible things are going on in our world. He starts to feel guilty, and Faber actually says, no, don't feel guilty. So Faber was telling him he's a fool before, but here he's like, no, don't feel that way. Because this idea of there is war, there is terrible things going on. If the world was peaceful and perfect, sure, have fun. But that's not what it is. Like, their world does have problems. So as much as Faber called him a fool, doesn't necessarily want him to feel guilty now. He's going to go in and see Beatty. This is the original reason that Montag even has that earpiece, so he can talk to Faber, because he's worried about what Beatty was going to say when he brings a book back. And this next part is this poker interaction. It starts with Captain Beatty calling him a fool in multiple ways, telling Montag he's a fool, he's silly, he only knows a little bit, but he thinks so highly of himself. Really, he knows nothing. He says, like, everybody's going to call you a fool. No matter what language, they think you're a fool. People who only know a little are the best fools. And the idea is, if you know something and you think you're so well educated, but you don't know everything, you only know a small fraction, you might be overconfident. You might think you know more than you do, or it might encourage you to do something when you don't have the full story. He asks him to sit in for poker, hoping that everything's okay. The interesting thing with poker is you try to read people. What are their cards? What is their hand? And when you read that close read, you realized Montag's really worried about his hands, literally, not his hand of cards. But Beatty's trying to see, how does Montag feel? How will he react? How will he read? And in poker, you're normally just reading a person. What cards they have? Can I beat them? This game of poker has a different level of depth, because Captain Beatty is saying things and judging Montag's reaction for how does he feel? What is he going to do next? Has this imagery that would go back to the Bible, this idea of the sheep and the flock. Talks about sweetly uttered knowledge is like a sweet food, like it's tasty, how much we like a sweet treat, that if you say something nicely and clearly, you're drawn to it. So, maybe Montag's just drawn to that. But then he goes on deeper into this. same way before, how a little learning can be a dangerous thing, or men who are a little wise, best fools be. Here says a little learning is a dangerous thing. Like if you only drink a little, a shallow draft, a shallow drink, like just a touch, you're just going to be like, oh man, I'm so great, I know everything. But if you read a whole book, if you engage deeply, it levels you off. And he's telling Montag, he's like, you don't know everything. You're not ready for this. He's like, you read a little bit. Now you're ready to go crazy, do these terrible things. So all of that was just to tell Montag, you don't know anything. You haven't read enough. You're not prepared. Sit down. Don't react. Come back to us. You're like a lost lamb. No worries. The next part of them playing poker is that Captain Beatty tells him about a dream. And this really goes to show that Beatty is so intelligent, is actually well-versed or educated, that he knows both parts of the argument. And he tries to make Montag feel really worried or intimidated by the fact that Captain Beatty could argue both sides and knows so much. So they go back and forth. His first set of quotes come from the same person, kind of showing that he's read it all, or that an author could say two things that contradict themselves. And he says that's chaos, so just stick with us. He presents this that Montag is yelling and that he's just kind of talking back. So he says, like, we need truth for light. But then Beatty says, devil can cite scripture. So you get this light and dark argument. And Beatty knows both sides, and he's throwing it all in Montag's face. This comeback of a gilded fool, then a threadbare saint, is this idea of, in this age, everybody thinks a foolish person who looks good is better than a smart person who's poorly dressed. It does kind of show up in their election. Here, they go back and forth, this idea of saying, if you make too big of a deal of something, people aren't going to listen to you. Or this idea of you might just be a small person, or a small thing, but if you have assistance from somebody else who's powerful, maybe you do even better. His final statement is this idea of imagery, a metaphor. That if you mistake a metaphor, a description, a phrase, this image for an actual proof, that's the biggest error people make. They don't actually prove things scientifically through a step-by-step hypothesis process. They're just like, oh, that's a beautiful description. I love that. And engage with it. He realizes he's got Montag feeling this, getting him on the ropes, getting him to be concerned. Says to talk some more, maybe not. Reinforces books can be traitors. At the beginning, he used two quotes from the same author to contrast, showed all these different comparisons from books, tries to make him realize you can't be anchored in a book because there's so many different perspectives. To us, that's the reason we read books, because they are different. We don't want the same thing. This whole stretch. Faber nuggets to say. He's like, you wanted your chance to think for yourself. You wanted your chance to do your own thing. Now that's it. You've heard his piece. I'll say my piece in a little bit. You can decide. But he acknowledges Beatty's very powerful because he's in the majority. So you got to think about it. Think it through. They then get a call that there's an alarm. Beatty gets the address and he's like, oh, okay, we'll sit down. No problem. We don't got to rush. We can still play poker. Montag, you want to keep playing? You tired? You want out? Montag gives. He's like, okay, you know what? Just leave the cards. We'll go get the equipment. We'll move on. Montag says it'll be all right. They do move on. They're screeching out. They're hauled in there. Beatty's like, we're here to keep the world happy. We're the happiness boys. We don't want people to be upset. They've arrived. Whole time Montag not saying anything. Thinking, how can I burn things after all that's gone on? They're still hustling there. Beatty's messing with them. All right, Montag, what you gonna do? Montag's face at the last panel. He looks surprised. At the start of part 3, they're in front of his house. The call was for his house. Whether that means his wife called on him or his wife's friends, Beatty knows. They're at the house. He's going to have to take action. And that's where we pick up for section 6. That's where we pick up the last section, Burning Bright. There will be 2 more readings. And you will see what exactly Montag is going to do. Have a good one.